Ports open.
Tonight's story is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction.
Who's gone off? Today we are canceling the apocalypse!
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet.
And this is?
Lilu Dallas Multipass.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Houston, we have a problem.
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Now, where was I?
Welcome to episode 124 of the BlokeBusters podcast. I'm Paul, and today I'm going to be going over the film Tenet. And yeah, let's get into that in just a second. But first, I'm here with the lovely Copper Yuenger, who is from the blog Never Drink from Mummy's Cup. You can find that if you just search Never Drink from Mummy's Cup. And you can also find her occasionally dropping in the soon-to-be-released episode of Soiled Western Cinema. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
I had fun recording with you on that, and I felt it only right to get you to come on here.
Hopefully it won't be too much of a disappointment.
No, I'm sure it'll be fine. So, let's see, get the nuts and bolts of the podcast out of the way before getting into anything else. If you want to get a hold of us about anything that we say on this, or I have said on any other episode, you can find us at BlokeBusters on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can email theblokes@blokebusters.com. You can go to blokebusters.com if you want. It's a lovely little site, and I'm fairly certain it's up to date at this point. I mean, you know, it's been a few days, I haven't checked, but I'm fairly certain it's up to date. And yeah, you can reach out to me on there. I'm always happy to talk about pretty much anything with anyone, so go for it. But yes, so we should definitely dive straight in now, because I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about this. It is Tenet, directed by Christopher Nolan, of course, a reported budget of $200 million and a box office of 363,129,000 worldwide. And my first question is, how the hell does it make that much money worldwide, given that it came out? When was it? Was it the summer?
It was like August or September, yeah.
Yeah, it was August in the United Kingdom, September in the United States. It's like, who the hell was going out to cinemas at this time?
Well, that really struck me as funny when I saw those numbers. 'Cause I'm like, just imagine, because that's a pretty decent number. I think it's still considered a failure by a lot of critics, but that's a big number considering that a majority of the world was not functioning in a way that people could go to the movies. So yeah. I mean, the general rule of thumb is whatever they spent on production, that's how much they also will then spend on the marketing. So yeah. This film technically did not break even when you're factoring both of those in. However, that does not factor in any of the streaming rights or anything like that. So, okay.
Yeah, I do think, especially for the next year or so, the actual box office of a film is going to be completely pointless to use as a metric. So, yeah. So, yes. I guess my first question to you then would be, what were your thoughts going into this? Like, did you know much about it, or did you have any hype for the film or anything like that?
So I'm generally going into a movie very careful not to read up too much on it. I like to go in kind of a blank slate. And luckily, I have been very disconnected to what has been out there, because not only are we in a pandemic, but living in a completely different country where most of the movies don't come out in a language I understand. I have not been paying that much attention. So I was not even familiar with this movie until you mentioned it. And I went into it went into it not knowing exactly what was going to happen, other than, who made it and who was in it. That was literally all I knew. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
So there was some confusion.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
sorry, I guess. I feel like there should have been a bit more primer.
No. I like not knowing that much before I go into movies. So, then I'll be honest, once I leave a movie is generally when I just read everything I can, kind of fill in the blanks after I've left the theater. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this film, I'm genuinely intrigued to hear what you thought then, because this film, you really need to know even a rough idea of what's coming when you go to see the film to even stand a chance of being able to fully grasp it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of my own stance on it, I heard that Christopher Nolan was doing another film, and of course my first thought was, well, I'm going to go see it. And then it was getting all of this little bits of information coming out, and it was going to involve some kind of time travel, some weird stuff going on. And I was like, well, yeah, that's definitely right up my alley.
Sounds right.
And then when the first trailer came out, and it was like, okay, so inversion, reverse entropy, that sounds really interesting. That's not something I'd ever seen before in a film. So I was like, okay, I think I'm on board. And then I saw the film, and now we get to talk about it. So, so yes. And obviously, for those of you that don't know, the main people in it, you've got John David Washington as literally the protagonist. Mm-hmm. That is the character's name. He is not known as anything other than the protagonist in this. And you got Robert Pattinson as Neil, who is technically the protagonist's handler, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, before I get any further as well, full spoilers allowed on this podcast. I don't know exactly how much we'll get into and how much of the film will spoil, but this is the spoiler warning for those of you that still have yet to see it but are listening to this. Elizabeth Debicki? I'm not 100% sure how you say that.
I think that's correct. Yes.
As Catherine or Kat Barton, who is an art appraiser and Sator's estranged wife, as it says here on the Wikipedia page. And then Sator himself, of course, is Kenneth Branagh, which an interesting choice. Not so much as in he couldn't pull it off, but it's just you get someone who's going to be playing a Russian character, and your first thought is not Kenneth Branagh. So,
right.
So yeah, it's interesting. And then there's a few other characters here and there, but we'll get to them as and when they pop up.
I have to say a little side note when you were talking about how Washington's name was protagonist, and it was kind of funny because I don't think it occurred to me through the entire movie that he didn't have a name.
Yeah, there's...
And then I was reading, and I'm like, wait, no, he didn't. So it was very smooth and like under the radar that they never really gave him a name. He was just the protagonist. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily something that he himself says is his name or is even his moniker or anything like that. Right. There is literally one point in the film where he is directly referred to as a protagonist, and then he calls himself the protagonist in response to that.
Yes.
But it's not something that's directly saying this is his name. It's just, a character is kind of in a meta way saying that he is a protagonist in the story. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's just one of those little things that I feel like if a film came out that wasn't Christopher Nolan doing time travel and the character's name was the protagonist, that would be the thing that the film is hooked on. Whereas in this, it just happens to be a side thing that you only find out if you actually read the credits.
Right. It's just a non-issue. Yeah. He didn't need a name, so they didn't give him one.
So yeah, I guess my first question then, given that you went into this completely blind, is what was the point when you lost the actual thread of how it was working. Like, because obviously, as you go through the film, you see little glimpses of, well, that's not quite right, especially when he is saved by someone unshooting someone.
Right. Yeah, you have that, and then there's a fight scene that at the airport in the hallway, and it just feels like really off. It's a great scene filming wise, but you're kind of watching it and you're like, nothing looks correct about it, So I think that's the point where I'm not quite understanding where this all falls into place. But okay. I did read that he wrote it in such a way that as the viewer, you were only given the information at the same time that the protagonist was given it. So you weren't necessarily meant to understand what was going on until that main character understood what was going on. So, I was pretty much lost from the get-go.
The viewer is the protagonist in this one. So it is interesting. And especially, I've seen it twice now. I obviously watched it once, and then when we were going to be talking about this, I was like, I'm going to rewatch it just to really go into it. Robert Pattinson's introduction and his first interaction with the protagonist, when you know how the film ends and you know what's going on, and then you rewatch that scene, it's actually really interesting.
It makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense. And first and foremost, I want to say that, I haven't seen The Lighthouse, so I can't comment on that, but Robert Pattinson is really good.
Yes, I agree, yeah.
He's phenomenal in this role. And so he sits down and he's talking to the protagonist and giving out information that's like, clearly the protagonist is shocked that he knows that he doesn't drink on the job. He knows what the drink that he likes is. And as you're watching Neil, he's obviously saying, I researched you, I listened to all this stuff. But if you actually watch his face during that interaction, and here's where spoilers come in, at the end of the film, you find out that he dies in the final mission, saving the protagonist, but he had known the protagonist for a long time. Because of the way that time travel works and stuff in this film, he was actually recruited by the protagonist, but well after the end of the film from the protagonist's point of view. And you can see in his face when he realizes that the protagonist doesn't know who he is, that I think in that moment he's come to terms with the fact that the mission he's on is his last.
Yes.
And it is so interesting to rewatch that. And there are several moments in this film where watching it the second time, obviously by design you get that, but all of these little things that work so well the first time through and get that double meaning the second time through. So
once you know the final story, then you're like, oh, that. Yeah, you could go back and see so much more. Well, I really liked in that scene where, you were talking about the drinks, but it was so funny. We got kind of a giggle out of it. And then when it made sense, it was even more powerful that he ordered him was it a Diet Cola or something to that effect? And then he goes, I prefer tonic water. And he says, no, you don't, don't lie to me. I know you,
Yeah, it's really cool. And like you say, you do only find out the information as the protagonist finds out. So it's clear that Neil knows something that he's not letting on, but the protagonist is going along with it because it's like, it's just another agent in the field.
Right.
And then you find out that Neil is not quite all he says he is, or at least not all he appears to be. But before we even get to that point, first and foremost, you can really tell that this is a Christopher Nolan film. I mean, forgetting for a second the blah of the film, because that's in the film, of course it is. But even forgetting that, just the visuals, the sound, the design of everything, it just feels like that Chris Nolan film. I wonder if it's possible for Christopher Nolan to make a film that doesn't look exactly like you would expect his film to make, you know? Like,
I would be shocked if he did, honestly. I just think it comes so naturally to him to make the films like this.
yeah, and you know, then there are several directors that obviously have that kind of a thing. Like, you know, you get some directors and, you know, in terms of being able to look at the film and just from the look say, oh, that's them. You know, like Steven Spielberg, you can't really do that. Like,
Right.
You can kind of get it if you're just watching it and you kind of feel from it and like you get a sense that it might be a Steven Spielberg film, but just watching it, you don't know. Quentin Tarantino, however, you know his films.
Yes.
Christopher Nolan, you know his films. Even I would argue Kevin Smith as well, because even though Kevin Smith does have, you know, he now has the relatively high budget type stuff and he has all of that stuff. All of his films just have that somewhat homemade feel to them. So
it's kind of his signature on, you know, everything that he does. So
yeah, and
Yeah.
Even something that he made, just tangenting slightly, when he did Red State, he made a film where every time he felt that the script was going where he thought it would, he would immediately change direction and kind of go into a different gear. And even though that film is really good and he really manages to achieve that and it doesn't feel quite like his normal film, if you actually look at it, like, it feels like there's a lot of handheld shots and things like that. Like it does still feel like a Kevin Smith film. So yeah, I feel like it would be really interesting, and I have no hope that this would ever happen. But I would love to see, say, Quentin Tarantino attempting to do a Christopher Nolan film, Christopher Nolan attempting to do a Kevin Smith film, and Kevin Smith doing a Quentin Tarantino film. Like I would love to see their takes on those genres and those films. Like
that would be interesting. I think the crossover would be pretty rough, though. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it is really truly a signature that they have on their styles. So
yeah,
I would have to think that it would be very hard to break away from what you're used to doing and going a completely different route.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It would be a fascinating experiment.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
yeah, I don't think it would ever happen, unfortunately. Now, one quick thing about the actual choices of some of the people in the film. Number one, I think that this is the least Michael Caine I have ever seen Michael Caine, and I'm including Michael Caine in Miss Congeniality in that. Because he's very much doing a character in Miss Congeniality, and this is still the least Michael Caine that I've ever seen.
But I really liked that scene. I thought it was like this little comedic break in between. I thought it was funny. I mean, just the way that they both like spoke to each other, and the whole scene just came across to me. It was well done. I don't know. I love Michael Caine, so I think anything he does is just fantastic. I could probably watch a movie of him reading a newspaper and think it was great. So.
Oh yeah, Michael Caine's awesome, and yeah, the really fun thing about that scene as well is that it's clear the protagonist couldn't care less that he's a Sir. And of course, it's funny that he's Sir Michael in this when Michael Caine is a Sir. Yes. So it was just like, yeah, we're not even going to change anything. You're just Sir Michael in this. Go for it. And yeah, it's clear the protagonist doesn't care for the pomp and circumstance of that type of establishment. And I got the feeling that Sir Michael also doesn't really care in that moment. Like, he's
I definitely agree.
He
thought it was
doing it, but he doesn't care that the protagonist doesn't care. Yeah,
there was a line in there. There was like a snobbery hit on his suit, like your Brooks suit will not work in this situation. While he hands him a credit card and asking if he can have his food taken or boxed up to take with him. So I don't know. I just thought that whole scene was really well done. It was kind of a funny little break in between all the action.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and also it's something that again you don't think of it very much until the end.
Yeah.
It drops a single piece of information that really ties into the finale. And that piece of information that it drops is that the same day that the protagonist was in that opera house in Kiev and everything went wrong, it's the same day that there was an explosion somewhere. Mm-hmm. And once you get to the end of the film, and they even do reference it at the end of the film again, but if you're paying attention, the end of the film takes place on that same day at the place where the explosion happens. So it's, and again, like looking into it, the film Tenet starts and ends at the same place.
Yes.
So, like, makes sense. Yeah.
It was that whole concept was actually really confusing for me because obviously going into it, I mean, I had like some sense that there was some time travel or whatever, but I almost felt like I needed to have a piece of paper so I could kind of write down these events and track exactly when these things happened. So,
yeah, well,
because I did not catch that until the end when you're like, okay, we're back to that day. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's actually one scene that we'll talk about in a little bit that you need more than a pen and paper. But yeah, the only other acting thing that I had was when it came to Kat. Again, I had no problem with the actress. I thought she did very well with the character and everything that the actor went through. However, I get the feeling that if this film were able to have been made, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, I think I know who would have played the character, and I think it would have been Carrie-Anne Moss. Because
really?
That character feels exactly like something that Carrie-Anne Moss would have done. Like, that sort of tone speaking, that stuff, like, it just felt very Trinity to me. And
I do think that I actually read somewhere that when he originally wrote that part, he meant for it to actually go to a slightly older actress. So the fact that it was someone as young as Kat was portrayed in the movie is already kind of an alteration to his original project. So yeah. It
is interesting because I could see, again, I can see a few different people kind of going for it, like, trying to like just place other actresses in there, but it's like at this point, I think for me, Tărăt is kind of the right choice based on anyone that I can try and put in there. And I think one thing that really sold it for me was the scene where the protagonist goes to meet her in the restaurant, and you can tell she doesn't expect him to get away from the restaurant, and then like when she gets out to the car, it is just like she's just kind of resigned, but she still doesn't want to see what's going on, and such. And then that kitchen fight scene, I'll say, is almost frustratingly short. However, I think it's incredibly well paced, a great use of space, and also a really good way of showing that the protagonist is perfectly capable of like handling his own. Like, it was almost like they were kind of leaning James Bond, but then they were like, well, no, we're not going to have the extended fighting. You don't need that. Like, that's not what this film is about. However, the protagonist is very good.
Yeah, he's very good. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever look at a cheese grater in the same light again. So I don't know that you knew he had to get away from that, even though how could he with that many people surrounding him? But he did handle himself very well, and it definitely showed that, his abilities were, he was very quick on his feet. So, which is why he was where he was.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, I think I actually, like, when they started fighting and they did what he did with the cheese grater, I literally think I said, like, oh my God, like, why? No. Like, I literally flinched just at the thought of that. I'm like, ugh. But yeah, it was a good scene.
Yeah. No, really good. Again, as I said, really short scene, which was like, it could have been done longer, but yeah, there are films that have done longer fight scenes in kitchens. In fact, I think John Wick, one of the John Wick films, had a longer fight scene in a kitchen. So, and this film is not built around, like,
I think it was quick and efficient. Other than the end there, every single action scene was short like that. Like, they got their point across and they moved on. There was so much to tell that they didn't linger on unnecessary punches.
Yeah, absolutely. And also jumping to the fight scene the next like kind of big fight scene with the protagonist fighting, as we don't know at the time, but then we do find out fighting himself backwards. Like I tried to watch that a second time, looking for any mistake, like anything at all.
Yeah.
Because I'd enjoyed it so much the first time, and I was like, okay, I really want to, like, from a critical standpoint, I want to come at this like, is there anything in the scene that, as far as I know, with my admittedly limited understanding of, you know, reverse entropy and all that sort of stuff, like, is there anything that I can pick out that wouldn't work? And surprise, surprise, I didn't.
No, it was pretty perfect. And
Yeah.
it made so much sense when you knew what you knew towards the end of the movie, you know, that why it was the way it was. Because it does come off like slightly awkward, but well done. And then you're like, it's because he knew exactly what he was going to do. So
Yeah. And yeah, it's really interesting. Like, again, going back with the prior knowledge now, like some of the things that I didn't even notice the first time, which is like when the protagonist is at the end of that fight scene, and then Neil obviously tells him not to kill him, and like, you know, the reasoning he gives is somewhat sound, but it is just like, you know, okay, like, why wouldn't he? And then
Right.
obviously now we know why, but even so, and then he just disappears, and it's like,
Yeah.
you cut back and he's gone, and it's like, what the hell was that? And then when you get to the other side and you see the other side of that, and it is just like he is blown in through thanks to the unexploding engine.
Yes.
And yeah, it's
this is where that piece of paper comes in handy again, where you can write things like, okay, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Now, I think we definitely need to talk about the scene where the protagonist is first inverted. Okay. So, first and foremost, before he even steps through the machine, like, what did you think of the interrogation scene that happened before that?
So,
Which
and
would
I
be, you know, the protagonist having to watch backwards Sata unshooting Cat.
So I think at this point he has a general idea of what is happening. Like, I think he sees a bullet hole. He knows that, you know, there's the detail that the bullet hole actually is red, so that you know it's actually going to be a person that the gun or the bullet goes through. It was slightly hard to follow, because one of the qualities to Nolan's films is he tends to not put voices over sound, so you have to really focus on a conversation in order to get it. It's not always very clear. And with this one, because you had the reverse Seder on the other side speaking, and then like there was this double tone coming through, it was kind of confusing, but I feel like it would have been confusing for him in the moment too. So it's exactly the way it should have been. But I think that it was maybe a turning point for him where he truly understood like what was going to happen and what he was going to have to do in order to change things from where they were headed. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting scene. And of course, you know, the first time you watch it, you're seeing Sata backwards interrogated. And even watching it the first time, I was like, okay, so he's asking all of these questions backwards, but to be asking the questions, he must have already known what he was asking. So it's like,
yeah,
okay, this is a bit odd.
Yes,
because he's just come back from the thing that he was doing after he's asked the question, and then of course you find out that this Sata or backwards Sata that you're watching is the same Sata that is in the room, who then wants to make sure that what he found out is right, because he's got to go in and then unshoot his wife. Which, yeah, this is the point where if I was clever enough about it, and if I did that sort of thing, which I typically don't need, I would just insert the "oh no, I've gone cross-eyed" from Austin Powers. But yeah, and yeah, this is the point where when the protagonist ends up becoming inverted, and you then find out obviously that Neil is actually with Tenet, and that he knows all about this stuff and how it works, as does literally everyone else that's around the protagonist at this point. And he then goes through, and you realize, like, oh, okay, so now we're going to get to see this backwards.
Yes.
Well, now, here's the part where my brain actually started to shut down a little bit, because you get to the point where he's now going backwards in time. Obviously, he's viewing it as going forward, but time in the rest of the world is going backwards to him. So I was trying to wrap my head around this, because what's happening is he's going backwards in time, which means technically if he stays where he is, he's going to witness Zeta coming out of the time machine, or the time turn, or what the inverter, however you want to call it, the turntable, blah blah blah. Now, there's a big thing in the film about saying that what's happened happened. Like, Neil is always saying that if something has happened, it will happen. It did happen. You're just going through it now and witnessing or taking part in something that is happening.
Right.
So technically, he can't just wait for Zeta and shoot him. Like, he can't do that because it didn't happen. But then you get into the things like, and I understand, if he did that, there's no film.
Right.
And then you also find out that if he does that, then this bomb goes off. So, several reasons why you shouldn't do it.
Right.
However, at this point in time, I don't see the reason why the protagonist doesn't do it. You know?
Because he doesn't really understand any. Well, he doesn't know that he'll, if Sator dies, then everyone dies, or he doesn't know any of that. There were several points where I just kind of wondered that, like, why wouldn't you just? He went back and saved him on the sailboat.
Yeah.
Without hesitation. I'm like, this could have been a good end of the movie, like she killed him off, because that's ultimately what I wanted anyway. I mean, her hatred for him because of how abusive he was to her, I really wanted her to be the one to, do the deed. But there were several times where he could have easily killed him and just didn't. And it's kind of a good thing he didn't, because it would have been tragic. So
yeah. And it's interesting because obviously, another thing, like trying to think about it and trying to think of the logistics of it from the standpoint that we see it, it's like, okay, you can clearly understand if he stands, say, right next to the machine, if he just stood there, he would watch the conversation that he'd had with them play out in reverse. He would watch Zeta coming out of both turnstiles, going forward on his side and going backwards on the other side. So that's kind of how that would work. The problem is you ever try and just think about one side without also thinking about the other at the same time, that's when your brain starts to scramble. Because you're thinking, okay, so he's going forwards. Obviously, he's going backwards in time from our point of view, but he's going forwards at this point. So what does that mean for the backwards Zeta? Like, if you only think of backwards Zeta from the protagonist's point of view at this point, then you should be able to understand how we would catch up, but you can't.
Right, exactly.
Because our brains don't work that way. However, if you also think, okay, so the other side of everything we just watched is now going backwards, you can pass together in your head, okay, so he would go back out of the turnstile, so you'll see him leaving the turnstile, sitting down, having a conversation, those people will leave, and then Zeta will come out of the turnstile to talk to him. And then at that point, Zeta will come out of the turnstile. So there is no point where you would see Zeta enter.
right.
You would only see two Zetas leaving. So that took me a while. That took me a long time to.
Well, and
to
I
find
think
again.
that still at that point I was fairly scrambled. Still, in the scene after that, when he then goes back to what would have been the highway scene, and you start seeing the things match up, because now he's going backwards through all this, and that started matching up. Then I was like, okay, I kind of get how this would work, and then it all really cleared up at the end. So with the battle scene, but I still, at that point when they were in those two rooms, it was still fairly confusing for me on how exactly it all worked. So
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, obviously, I'm now coming at it from having seen it twice and having had the time to really pass through everything and try and understand it. Like I tend to pride myself a little bit on being able to follow some of these things like fairly well. I have a fairly logical like thought processes and stuff like that, so I'm typically able to follow these things quite well, especially in Hollywood cinema.
Right.
I will say the only other film that has ever thrown me for a loop in that regard would be Primer. And that's because Primer is written by people that understand this stuff and isn't dumbed down in the slightest. So,
right.
So given that I don't have an understanding of the physics and the theoretical physics involved in Primer, I don't fully understand Primer. And for this as well, like they had a theoretical physicist who worked with Nolan on Interstellar specifically to consult with him on how time and quantum physics work.
Right.
So that from the writing standpoint, from all of this, like, he would be able to give enough information to Nolan so that Nolan could plan all of this stuff out effectively. So, yeah, as you say, the chase leading up to the interrogation and inversion scene, like, when you're watching it the first time through, like, some of it doesn't quite make sense.
Right.
And
you have your suspicions, but you're, like, okay, I think I kind of get this, but maybe not. But
yeah. And there's that one car that flips or unflips, and you're just like, okay, that's odd. And then once you get out the other side of that, and then you realize, oh, so that is the protagonist in that car. Right. And then also you don't know what has happened to the protagonist after that, because from your point of view watching the film the first time, you haven't seen that because you only come across him uncrashing. So right. It's really cool. I tried to look for, and I didn't see, but I tried to look for some kind of sign of a car exploding or a flash or some kind of noise leading up to that, but I couldn't hear it or I couldn't see it on my second watch. But yeah, the one thing that took me a while to devil's advocate my way to it with this. It's the only thing that in the entire film I was like, okay, I don't see how this would work. Like, even taking into account the way things are supposed to work and all of that, like, I don't think it works, is how does the car explode when he's going backwards in time? Like, the only way I could think that it might work is if the petrol and the lighter were inverted as well. But that doesn't make sense because they haven't inverted the car.
Right.
So, because if you think about it, only the people have been inverted.
Right.
So only the people are going backwards in time. So if you drop something, or like the people are going backwards in time, so if the person dropped a match onto the petrol, technically nothing should have happened because they're going backwards in time. So what should have happened is the car should have been already exploded.
Right.
Assuming we're following this through, the car should have already been exploded, and then it would unexplode, and then the fire would go to the end, and then he would catch the thing because he's going backwards, not the object. So
you have really worked yourself into a corner there.
Oh no, and that's the thing. It's like I fully understand that out of everything in this film, like this is the thing that I'm kind of like saying, no, this doesn't really work. But it's like even with the admittedly somewhat hand wavy, this is not the droid you're looking for thing of Neil saying that obviously our entropy, as in the entropy that we experience every day today, going through time the way that we do, the way that our universe does, that pushes against anything else. So anything trying to go the other way is typically just snuffed out, which is why in the film they say that the explosion that the protagonist is in doesn't kill him, because from our point of view, the universe is going, no.
That's not, that's not how it happens, right?
And so it's like, obviously, admittedly hand wavy, but also a cool explanation. It
Very
works
true.
out quite well. however, I still, like, even having watched it twice, having spent a couple of days genuinely like racking my brains on this, that car explosion makes no sense. Like, it genuinely doesn't. If someone is willing to explain this to me, like, if someone is willing to sit me down and just say, you're wrong, this is why, I will happily listen to it. But I genuinely don't think I'm wrong here.
I mean, is it possible that explosions like that are just cool? And so that's why it had yeah.
No, absolutely. From a plot standpoint,
right.
From a cinematic standpoint, I fully understand why it's there.
Right.
But
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, from a film that genuinely seemed to pride itself on getting all of this stuff right, that one piece doesn't fit.
That's where they dropped the ball.
Yeah. Now, I will say that regardless of that, the end of the film fully redeems it.
Yes.
Because holy hell, that is one ending to a film. But before we get to that point, is there anything else that you wanted to specifically cover from this film before we really start wrapping it up?
Oh gosh, you're putting me on edge.
You don't have to have found any other weird spider web of conspiracy theory thing from it. Just, is there anything else that stood out to you from this film?
No, I'm going to say there were some really great one-liners in this that I kind of liked a lot, but as far as like the storyline and how it goes, no, I don't think that I have. I think we've actually covered a lot of the areas where I was considerably confused. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So, yeah, and, through the film, and this is actually a really interesting film to kind of cover with this, because normally, like, I'll touch on different bits in the film and stuff like that, but it's like, if you actually go through and piece this film together, like, there are some fantastic interactions between some of the characters, but that's not the main thrust of this film in terms of, like, the themes of this going forward. It's like, if you're going into this film, for the most part, obviously you did not, but for the most part, you're looking for the inversion stuff. You're looking for how they're doing this stuff. And so, like, the main areas of that is what we've been focusing on. Although I will say before we do jump to the finale that I found it really interesting watching the protagonist interacting with Priya, because I don't feel that I got a full understanding of who she was.
Correct.
Like even at the end of the film on my first watch, I never fully appreciated what her character or where her character fit within even the organization or like all that stuff. Like I didn't fully get it. Like it wasn't until my second go through that I was like, okay, obviously she's been brought into Tenet somehow. Like she's within the organization, so it's like, okay, what part does she play? And it's absolutely fascinating because obviously the protagonist interacts with her at the beginning when she explained to him kind of what this weird device is, or technically not. She explained that he has nuclear materials, and then it turns out that's not the case. So she's explaining that, and then you find out she actually had met him 2 days before, and then you kind of got a bit more there, and then right at the end when she's a loose end that's tied up, and then you also realize, oh, but it's even more interesting than that because then the protagonist goes back and recruits her.
Yes.
So the protagonist that has killed her in his past goes back to the past and recruits her into the organization that he will then end up killing her to found. So yeah, it's fun. I really do enjoy all of these. Like, okay, this is interesting. Like, where's this going? I can trying to.
Well, we were talking about it after we watch. I'm like, the storyboards on this thing had to be insane. Just trying to get it all like straightened out and everything. So
yeah, absolutely.
And then when they go back to the plane crashing into the storage units and coming at that scene from the completely different angle than it was originally shot was really cool and well done. And cool is such a weak word. What do I want to say? it was so well done. So I just think that it was well thought out and shot well. And I lost my total train of thought there. I apologize.
No,
so I thought that was, and it did not just such a great job of what they needed to do at that moment, but then it went back and tied up some of the loose ends from when they were in that scene before.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think it'll be fascinating, and I'm sure it'll be an option. I don't know if you used to have the Memento DVD, but there was an option on the Memento DVD if you found the Easter egg to watch the film in chronological order.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You had to. It was one of those things where, back when DVDs were a big thing and they had Easter eggs, like you would go to this one menu, go off to the side, select something, and it would play it in chronological order. So you got all the black and white scenes, then you got the middle scene, and then you got all of those scenes at the end. So it was an interesting way of looking at it. I think Tenet, if you were ever to do that type of thing, I think Tenet should have an option where you watch it backwards.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yes.
Yeah,
I would. Yeah.
Because I think that it would be a fascinating thing to see what it looks like, like running backwards. Because obviously we see several scenes from forward and backwards perspectives. So to then flip it again and see it the reverse of that, I think it would be fun. Obviously everything would need to be subtitled.
Right.
But yeah, I think it would be good. And what was the other thing I was going to touch on? The only other thing I was going to touch on briefly before we really got to the finale is something that is, again, an interesting thing, because a lot of these films have MacGuffins. That is just a thing. Mm-hmm. And the MacGuffin in this one happens to be a device which is, as they explain in the film, an algorithm from the future made physical so that it can't be copied. And that one is another one of those lines where it's like, it's a future thing. Like this is the thing way in the future. We're not going to explain it because we can't. And it's just easier this way, which, again, I perfectly understand. And I actually don't regret the film at all for doing that. Like, it's just, it was like, okay, we need something that is physically there for there to be a danger. Fair enough. Here we go. Sort of works in the story. Let's go with it.
Just trust us on this.
Yeah. And again, it's something where throughout the entire film, like, this MacGuffin's here. The protagonist is looking for it. Like, Sator is trying to figure out a way to destroy it so that it destroys the universe and all of that fun stuff, from our perspective anyway. It's like, oh, this is a huge MacGuffin thing. And I found myself at the end not caring about the MacGuffin itself.
Right.
Like, it's so interesting because this particular MacGuffin is the central drive for all of these characters. Well, okay, 90% of these characters. Mm-hmm. and it's the weirdest thing where at the end of the film, I couldn't care less about the MacGuffin or what it looked like or anything like that, because I was just so interested in the world of everything else. Like that was what brought me in. That was what I found interesting. So yeah, I found it really, really odd and different. And again, it's so fun to see a Nolan film because he's always doing something different with it. And yeah, there were several like, never seen that before, or never thought of that before in this. But as I said, we're getting to the finale. So the last, what would it be, about 25 minutes of this film, probably some of the most like on the edge of my seat stuff I've seen in a long time. Because a tempo pincer movement on this place where they've got a team going forward in time, a team going backwards in time, fighting against ordnance that is also going forward and backwards in time. And they're trying to get down to this thing to get the MacGuffin out of this place because there's going to be a bomb that goes off which will destroy it. And so we keep cutting from that to Kat talking to Seta.
Right.
And on the boat. And there's actually something that I didn't quite catch the first time watching it, and I finally got it the second time. There's a line where Kat says that she saw a woman jumping from the boat when she was coming back, and she was jealous of how free that person was.
And it was her.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny you mention that, because I almost, when she got onto the boat after watching herself leave with her son and everything, and she got on a boat, I'm like, it instantly clicked with me on who it was that then the other version of her saw was, so I'm like, that actually worked out.
Yeah.
Like, it was kind of sweet that it was actually her and that she was just envying a future version of herself. So
yeah, it was a really interesting sort of character arc, as it were, and yeah, absolutely, for me, without a doubt, like I really enjoyed the first inversion scene, and like seeing the protagonist getting to grips with how everything was working, and trying to follow what's happening in all of it, because there's a lot. But in this finale, with everything going forward and backwards, people getting stuck in buildings that are unexploding, but then we also see the buildings exploding. Like,
it was insane.
It was insane and so well done. And I could not take my hat off quick enough to Christopher Nolan for that whole scene, and like, all of the little things, because if you are really paying attention and like really logging in every single frame, because you keep cutting back and forth from the people going forward, people going backwards, and there are just so many little things that you realize, oh, the thing that you are kind of seeing in that shot then matches up a couple of shots later in the reverse. Like, you're seeing both sides from both sides at times, and yeah, I was just fascinated by the whole thing. And then of course at the end you get to see the mysterious person that saved the protagonist at the beginning with the unshot round, saving him from being shot, but like being unshot again. It's yeah, very fascinating. But it's really interesting. And then at the end you find out that it was Neil.
It was Neil.
And I did love that they didn't give that away at all in the film. Like, you didn't see him holding the charm. It wasn't on his bag that was down by his feet at some point. Like, you genuinely didn't see it on him at all, except at the end. And that's because he's not wearing anything that you would see that on, or you don't see him from an angle that you would see it.
You would see it.
Right.
Well, and it almost like I had started to get irritated because, we were reaching the end of the movie. I'm like, are we really never going to learn who this person was? Because in the beginning, you went through all the trouble to tell that story, and you're not going to, bring it around full circle. And then, of course, I should have known better that he would. But I guess looking back, maybe I should have known that it was Neil. But I had honestly thought at some point in time it was going to be another version of the protagonist that saved himself. So I was generally thrown off by that.
Yeah, and it would have been an interesting choice as well. However, I can see why they wouldn't go with that. Unless they made it that it was a much older version of himself, and then I think it wouldn't have quite made sense given everything else. Especially, he's quite athletic, so it wouldn't have really made that much sense there. Now, my favorite thing in this entire film comes from the finale, and it probably isn't what you think it is, and it's because I have a very morbid sense of humor. It is how Seta's body falls off the yacht.
I cracked up, so you're not alone.
Yeah, just seeing that,
thunk.
Yeah, that just thunk, flip, splash.
And then to have the scene with the boat dragging the body behind, I'm like, it was great. So you're not, you're not alone in your horribleness. So
yeah, it was just fine, and obviously that's not the point of that scene, but it's just like after everything, such an unceremonious death.
right,
Like,
right.
It's just phenomenal. I really liked it. But yeah, I think like my one thing for this film, if I were to ever recommend it to someone, is absolutely you should probably understand what you're getting into. So again, I apologize. I didn't realize you didn't know what this was.
Well, and like I said, it's usually, it doesn't always happen that way. A lot of times, like I'll read a book before I go to the movies, but if something like this, like I just try to generally go into it without really reading too much into it. So I like the shock of trying to figure it out and everything, but I should have known better going into one of his movies, that maybe I should have read a little bit into it. But once I was done, there were a lot of things that just made so much more sense.
Yeah.
With a little bit of clarification. So,
oh yeah,
but
absolutely.
I thought it was fabulous. I mean, I really, truly did enjoy this movie. It actually made me a little sad that I wasn't seeing it in a theater. So, I think it would have been great on a big screen. I mean, we have a nice TV, but not,
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I think that, I mean, it was just really well done. I struggle to understand why the reviews on it, the ratings are as low as they are. I don't know. I thought it was really great.
Yeah, I don't understand why there's so much negativity for this.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe part of it is the idea that they were making this film and like they were hell bent on releasing it in the cinema. Mm-hmm. Like maybe part of it is just like people were understanding, as you say, like it was sad that we didn't get to see it in the cinema. So it could be that there were some people like, oh, it wasn't that good, and it's like, well, if you'd seen it on the big screen with everything, like maybe you would have been more immersed. Because that really is Nolan thing. Like you need to see his stuff in as big a screen as possible with as immersive sound as possible.
Yes, yeah.
So,
that battle scene in a movie theater would have been amazing.
Yeah, I would love to see this again in like a couple of years when everything is relatively opened up again.
Such high hopes.
Yeah. I mean, based on everything that's coming out and how things seem to be going, like possibly the end of this year, we're looking at some sense of normalcy again. But
fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only other thing I could think of is why, like, it is a very complicated concept. So I don't know if people just got so stuck on that they couldn't get past it, and that might be why.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was dumbfounded by that after reading a lot of the reviews and seeing the ratings. I'm like, I thought it was really good. I would venture to say it might be one of his better films. So
yeah. I mean, the guy is clearly learning a lot from everything he does, and now he's able to bring some of his own ideas really out for it. Apparently, it took him like longer than 5 years to write.
Yes, yeah,
and
it took him 5 years to write it, and it was a concept for over 15 years. So I mean, he's been really working on the thought process for a long time behind this movie. Yeah.
Which, fair enough.
Yeah. It's going to take me about that long to understand it all. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate a film. Like, as you say, like, there's a lot to this film, and it doesn't really talk down to you about it.
No.
Like, you've got to either just strap in and go with it, or know a lot about theoretical physics to really get a lot of it. But I'm thoroughly enjoyed watching it. I'm really glad that I took the time to watch it, and I have a feeling I'll probably watch it at least once more just to really see if I didn't miss anything again. Because, this is definitely one of those films that I'd recommend at least seeing twice, if not more.
I would agree. I think we might sneak it in one more time before our rental period expires. So
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah, you do that, and you let me know if you see anything, because I'd be interested to see it at anything I missed as well. Hello. Yes, I have dropped in here where you least expected me to begin a new segment, which is going to be called BlokeBusters Denizens Review, or BDR, as some people might like to call it. Doesn't remotely sound like any other thing that might exist, so there's 3 letters and ends in DR. Not at all. Don't know where you got that idea. Anyway, this is the part where I will be reading out any comments or reviews that people have brought in for the films that we're reviewing. In this case, we got one back from One Good Thing, saying that this film is the most Nolan movie ever Nolaned. All his strengths, all his weaknesses. Also, it's his take on a classic Bond movie and a highly ambitious summer blockbuster. I loved it. And that's from Paul or Paul, so I will let you make your decision as to who exactly wrote that, because it sounds very much like Paul, but not necessarily like Paul, at least you know what I'm talking about. Alright, okay. I'd say we've covered that fairly well. Okay. So, for those people that really want to get a hold of you or see what you're doing, where can they find you?
So you can find me over at Never Drink from Mommy's Cup. On Facebook or Instagram is actually the best way to follow me and get a hold of me if you should need to. I don't know why you would, but I welcome conversation all the time. So yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it seems like you're going to be at least a semi-regular on Sword Russian Cinema when that is officially back. Yes.
So
excited about that too.
Yes. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think you're in for a wild ride there. But yes, so once again, if you do want to get a hold of BlokeBusters at all, just search BlokeBusters. You'll find us. You might need to tell Google, yes, you did mean to search for BlokeBusters and not BlokeBusters, but you will find us. Don't worry. And do reach out. You got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us. You can go to the website. You can find us in many places. You can reach out to us in many places, and I will welcome any and all discourse. So yes, please do reach out. And yeah, I think with all of that being said, I have been Paul,
and this is Copper.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Hang on a minute, lads. I've got a great idea.
Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.